we did our first Halloween with girls this year, this weekend, obviously just gone. Little one went as Queen Elizabeth I, other one went as a fairy. Dad decided to go as embarrassing dad. Didn't need to change, but the costume seemed to fit perfectly. All right, lots to get to this evening, including Chris Bowen's latest excuses as to why you need to be kept in the dark. We'll talk about that with Lee Hansen and with Daniel Wild. We'll go to the United Kingdom, where police are about to give us an update about that horrible attack on the bus involving 10 people that have been stabbed. Mark Dolan will join us from the United Kingdom. We'll get to him a little later in the show. But first, the breaking news is a new opinion poll is a new low for the Liberal Party, a new high for One Nation. Now, Sunday night is, generally speaking, during the footy season, the time when you know what's really going on when it comes to your footy team. They've either won by a lot, won by a little, or got, beaten by a little or thumped by a lot. And on Sunday night, this Sunday night, at the start of November, let's be realistic. The Coalition's primary vote is now 24%. One Nation's has now doubled to 15%, which is a phenomenal result. Big movement which is happening on the right of Australian politics. I cheer it on because you know that I want more One Nation senators, keeping it real in the Senate. Labor, basically where it was at the election, at 36%. Once you put it together with the Greens, before you even start to get to the Teals, Independents or anyone else, they are sitting very pretty, which is why the ugliest thing I can show you tonight, apart from my mug, is the two-party preferred. The election was in May. In November, there is no buyer's regret. 55-45 was the two-party preferred after the May election that produced, 90-something seats, massive change in Australian politics. Yes, by preferences, but still. In the end, there's a choice between one government, one opposition, or an opposition that becomes the government that becomes the opposition. Again, 55-45 is what it was. Put simply, the right of Australian politics has shrunk. Yes, there's been big movements and there's been a big surge in One Nation, but the collective left of Australian politics has grown. So the footy score that was massive a few months ago is getting bigger. That's just the truth. Not here to play games, but to tell you the truth. In terms of preferred Prime Minister, Anthony Albanese, problems and all, 54% is the preferred Prime Minister. Susan Ley, 27%. 19% of people still remain uncommitted. If all of them walked across the road, you would still have a majority of Australian voters backing in this terrible Prime Minister. And a government that, in our view, has made an awful lot of mistakes, but according to the polls, no, zero, bugger all, buyer's remorse, which would mean they're all going to feel very pretty, very happy as the political year comes to an end. The difficulties for the right of Australian politics will only get more difficult. I wish I could open with happier tones on a Sunday night. It may annoy some that I mention this, but it is just the reality. In the same way that there's a lot of people that are blind to the politics of the United States, where you base everything off the media, well, there's polls, and we'll get to those this week, that will actually tell us what is happening a year after the presidential election. Well, less than a year after our prime ministerial, not election, but our federal election, again, the collective left is now bigger than the records that it was able to pull up on that particular day. We'll talk about the surge in One Nation with Lee Hansen, who is in part leading the future of the party, and particularly in Tasmania. Massive news about Tasmania and One Nation. And remember, with only a 6-week campaign, she almost got there in the Senate. Imagine what a 3-year campaign is going to, fingers crossed, hopefully do. The great Lee Hansen talks about the surge in One Nation and the future of the right of Australian politics. She's a winner, and we'll get to her in a couple of minutes' time. It doesn't matter how many times we talk about immigration. There are plenty of people who are in a greater position of power to do something about it, who just pretend you cannot discuss this whatsoever. Now, remember, for as long as I've talked about this, we don't talk about skin colour, we don't talk about culture, we don't talk about faith, we simply talk about the raw number of human beings. 30 years ago, this country had 18 million people. 30 years later, so from the mid-90s to now the mid-2020s, we've now got 27, almost 30 million. 30 years from now, we could be into the mid-40s. Does anyone believe that the current number of hospitals, schools, aged care centres, disability services, all the rest of it is up to snuff with our current number, let alone the number which is coming our way? But of course, to discuss this at all, the government has worked out what is pretty successful politics, but still, this is their line and nobody's allowed to question it.
People used to talk about being able to engage in dog whistle politics, and you give a message and only certain people would really hear what you were saying. It's not a dog whistle anymore. It's, it's a set of bagpipes coming over the hill.
This annoys me. It annoys me deeply because our concern is simply about the number of people competing for the number of services that currently exist. Right now, if there is a family that needs to find somewhere to rent, there are fewer places to rent than ever before, with more people looking for them than ever before, the cost of which goes up, up, up. Yet we keep being told nothing to see here. To discuss it is, well, the R word. Remember, at the National Press Club, when we were being told that by the Human Rights Commissioner.
Racism. 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 Racism.
Like a metronome of the R word, right? Well, the reality is that there is a very significant number of Australians who can see this for what it is, who are not racists, who are not dog-whistling racists, who are not finding ways to talk about people who look different. No, it's just, again, about the number of people 30 years ago, 18, now 28, on our way towards the mid-40s. A federal budget that, despite the fact that we may even be able to add another 10, 15, 20 million people to the overall tax base, the federal budget would be in deficit until the 2060s. That's the reality of our country, is that we are whistling by the graveyard when it comes to our own future. And apparently to be concerned about the future somehow means you're either playing the race bagpipes or you just are the outright racist. Well, opinion poll dropped via James Campbell in the newspapers this weekend, Daily Telegraph, Sunday Herald Sun, or so should I say Sunday Telegraph, Sunday Herald Sun, the Sunday Mail, and immigration fears are now surging amongst Australians, One Nation doubling its support overall, matching in with what I just told you about the news poll. Now, in February of 2024, only 11% of people said that immigration was in their top 3 issues. Now, 22%, literally doubling. Now, 22% is not 50%, so we can all still say this is not a major issue for the majority of Australians, but for a significant number, it is. In fact, if you have a look at what the apparent key issues are, supposedly, the cost and standard of living still remains up there, with almost 7 out of 10 people putting it in their top 3 issues. Housing and accommodation, 4 out of 10 people putting that in their top 3 issues. Crime and social order. So again, we keep being told, no, everything's fine in Victoria. These issues aren't anything worth talking about. Well, it's in the top 3, above health. And then immigration cracks it into the top 5 there with 22%, above managing the economy, above climate change, above defence, above roads and transport, above education. Gives you an idea about how significant this issue is and why it needs to be discussed. Hence why in their poll, regardless of Labor still having the majority of support, both before and after preferences, 52% of people believe the country is headed in the wrong direction. 35% believe that the country is headed in the right direction, 13% are unsure. The asterisk on all of this, the people responsible for it are the Freshwater organisation, who, remember, are the ones who told us that the Libs were winning at the last election, as opposed to the reality of that massive scoreboard being racked up against them, one that continues to be growing against them. Which brings us to the issue of net zero. Now, as you know, the National Party has met this weekend. It has made the decision that is no surprise to anyone.
The Nationals party room has voted to dump net zero by 2050.
The National Party has officially ditched its commitment to a net zero target.
The National Party has abandoned its target for net zero carbon emissions by 2050.
Now, the argument of people like our friend Matt Canavan, every Monday with us on the show, is that if you still have this policy, it is difficult to argue against the implementation of this policy, and therefore the Labor Party will still remain in this majority position, both having the highest primary vote and, after all of those preferences, having such a massive, like very close to, 6 in 10. Remember, 57-43 is the overall score right now in News Poll tonight. So explaining why this is the right place to land, Matt Canavan in detail tomorrow night, but in brief this evening.
And I'm very, very glad today to see the Nationals Party stand up on this and fight, because the first job of an opposition is to have a voice, not an echo. And we, the Nationals Party, have found our voice today. We are now going to be a voice for the pensioners and the students who can't afford their power bill. Yep. We're going to be a voice for the people at Tomago who are facing the loss of their jobs, and the people over in the west that we've all forgotten who lost their jobs when the nickel industry left our shores.
Now, what will be really interesting here is that we are now in a scenario where the Nationals are obvious, dump net zero. If the Liberals don't do it, then the coalition is going to split again. We are going to have a scenario where there will be Libs versus Nats versus Labor versus One Nation versus Greens. Presumably, the preferences will flow between the Liberals and the Nationals, but of course, a campaign means that you spend time trying to tear your opponents down. That may be one of the consequences if the net zero policy remains for the Liberals. And it does feel like the National Party is more than willing to be out on their own, to be the ones arguing in their local electorates to make sure that the same number of MPs they currently have are the same number that gets sent back after the next election in 2.5 years' time. Remember, David Littleproud was the leader of the Nats when they broke up with the Libs just after that horror election result.
We're not walking away from reducing emissions. We continue to believe that we need to reduce emissions, but we've got to do it in a better, fairer, cheaper way for all Australians. And what we are going to say is that we believe that we can peg ourselves to the rest of the world. We're not going to be a laggard, but we're not going to streak ahead.
Now, this is a very important bit of grey in the argument of black and white, a little bit of nuance. And generally speaking, in politics, when you're arguing the grey or you're arguing the nuance, you get yourself into trouble because it's not as easy as, this is a good idea, this is a terrible idea. All right? But very importantly, the National Party, while getting rid of net zero today, has still said they believe in climate change, they believe in doing something when it comes to emissions, but they don't believe that when you set net zero, that basically from 2025, 26, 27, 28, we act like it's 5 minutes before 2050, and therefore we are trying to push everything to zero as fast as possible. Yes, the end date is 2050, but the action date is now. So whether we're going to see a scenario where the National Party's idea, and again, we'll talk to Matt about this tomorrow night, and I'll be fascinated to see, because their position is climate change still needs to be dealt with, but we're not going to outrace the world. So what is their suggestion? Is their suggestion that we need to plant 1 billion, 2 billion more trees to be able to suck carbon dioxide out of the sky? What are those ideas? Because yes, they will be alternative policies to the net zero by 2050, which means every dial possible must be turned down. Is this a policy of adaptation, of being able to deal with climate as it is, as opposed to pretending that we can fix the climate when we are 1% of the global problem, and obviously our climate is affected by the 99% that we share this planet with? Which brings us to the Liberals. This week is going to be an important week because they're going to have all the pressure on them to make a decision. On Friday, they had a chat, and it does seem that they're trying to find a way of sort of having it both ways. Not fully, but they understand that there are sections of the right who believe that the National Party is in the right place, or even, as Pauline Hanson goes further out, to believe that we don't really even have to do something about the global problem because whatever we do will be swamped by the rest of the world. I'm paraphrasing her position. Obviously, if I've got that wrong, Lee can correct me in a couple of minutes. Liberals will pursue net zero policy review despite Nationals moving to abandon the 2050 target. Who said that? Again, friend of our show, Shadow Environment Minister Angie Bell. Remember, they are in a scenario where you can't be half pregnant. You either back net zero or you don't back the way Labor is implementing net zero, but you've got to come up with whatever your version of implementing net zero is about. Why? Because you've got the Teals that have already been re-elected, they're not going anywhere, and a whole bunch of other ones that want to take their seats.
We'll go through our processes, which your viewers would understand would be different to the National Party processes, and we'll come to that in due course when we've done the work. I'm not ruling anything out at this point in time, because what we need to be is united on one page when it comes to moving forward with our energy policy. And
Now, interestingly, the obvious alternative when it comes to leadership is Andrew Hastie. He was not in the meeting on Friday. Apparently he was dealing with an injury from pre-existing injury from sport. Fine, fair enough. But obviously he is going to be leading the charge inside the party of saying, you know what, where the Nats are is where we should be, or we should certainly be closer to the Nats than we should be the current position of Labor. Now, when I show you what I'm about to show you, I inevitably will get dozens of emails of people who will react that somehow I'm trying to push things in one direction or the other. I'm not, okay? I'm not a participant. I'm an observer, a commentator, but also somebody who believes we've got to have an honest conversation. We've got to talk about the reality of the situation, not what we dream or hope it to be. Now, can you change people's minds? You betcha. Can you take a voice situation of 60-40 and turn it the other way around into 40-60? You bet. But again, remember what I told you at the start of the show. Tonight, Newspoll says that the right of Australian politics has shrunk since the election. The left of Australian politics has grown. The Essential poll, which comes out via the Turnbull Times, The Guardian, now they did their best to try to twist to get the headline that they did, which said, Liberal voters want more progressive coalition, as most Australians back net zero. Now, they did not provide a chart or some of the behind-the-scenes numbers that means I can tell you much more than this, but let me read what justified, in their mind, that headline. Asked what direction the Liberal Party should take to providing an alternative government for Australia, 48% said that they should adopt more progressive policies, 28% said that they should maintain their current position. The least popular response at 24% was to adopt more conservative positions. Now, really important here is that it is difficult to work out whether that's everyone commenting or whether that's Liberal voters commenting, but remember, the headline infers that that is Liberal voters. Now again, their science, their poll, you feel how you feel. The support for more progressive positions was higher in the 236 people of the 1,000 polled who identified as coalition supporters, with 49% calling for more progressive positions, 23% backing current positions, 29% wanting more conservative policies. Paul, why are you mentioning this? 236 people? There's 27 million people in the country. Why would 236 people matter in a poll? Because without boring you, and I'm not great at the maths, but without boring you, somewhere between 1,000 and 1,500 is apparently a representative sample of the Australian population, and that's basically the amount that most of the pollsters, from the ones who get it really right to the ones who get it really wrong, but most of them are all sitting somewhere between 1,000 and 1,500. Now, those that are self-admitted coalition supporters are obviously a fraction of it. So again, I'm not betting the house on 236 people, but it is the same mathematical logic that gets us to where we are with Newspoll tonight, where we were in the final polls just before the federal election. The same polls that, remember, 12 months ago when we were wrapping up 2024, the Labor Party was behind, the Prime Minister was in a world of trouble, and we thought we were going to be having a much better election result than the one that actually happened. So as you can see, there are many choices to be made here, and it'll be fascinating to see what happens after they land in a position. Because the climate change is bullshit, we shouldn't do anything about it position is not going to be 50% of the country, okay? You saw with the Nationals that they say get rid of net zero, but still believe in climate change, have to still do something about it, but we shouldn't be trying to outpace everyone else in the world. Seems to me to be a reasonable position. Where are the Liberals going to land? Because remember, they're up against very well-funded Teals who want the federal government to go even harder than they currently are, and they're closer to Greens. Now, again, it's not about winning back Teal seats. That has now been shown to be very difficult. But we know that millions of dollars is spent trying to win even more Liberal seats, and there is one person that I probably will try to find a way to talk to this week, and his name is Alan Tudge. Now, remember, him in the seat of Wannon in Victoria went up against a Teal who had the single most amount of donations of any candidate anywhere in the country, and he won. I'll be fascinated to see where he lands, because he is in one of those target electorates. What does he know about the political calculation on this issue, let alone what you believe to be the right or wrong thing to do? I'll seek him out, or if he pops up on other shows, I'll report back what his position is, because I find it interesting. In the meantime, the Prime Minister, fresh back from yet another overseas trip, he has one line and one line only. And remember, it is always easier to argue black and white than it is to argue the grey. Now, people like Matt Canavan can absolutely argue the black and white, right? Just like with the yes and no of the referendum, they can pull an issue, and they may have everyone against them, but they can pull an issue, right? So I'm not saying they can't do it. But this is the starting point of what people who don't believe the government is in the right place are up against.
If you don't support net zero, you don't support action on climate change. It's as simple as that.
Now, again, interesting to note. Where does this land? There are many, many political calculations inside all of this. We'll see how it goes. Now, again, I'm not sitting here pretending that I'm sort of, the leader of church here and I'm telling you there's only one way to go. My belief is climate change exists. Australia has to do something in relation to trying not to make things worse. But I also know that even if we did everything that everyone wants, we still get absolutely swamped by the much bigger polluters around the world. At the end of the day, we're 1% of the world's problems. Why tie two hands behind our back? I don't believe that we should have to turn every farm into a forest. I don't believe every mine has to be closed down. I don't believe that going from the power system that has worked so well to the one that fingers crossed might, that destroying the earth to build a wind farm or destroying the earth to build millions more solar panels is the answer. We'll get there all together. We'll all find out. But the politics is going to be very interesting because the wind is, whether we like it or not, at the Prime Minister's back. They end the year stronger than they started and even stronger than at that election. Sorry to say, but Sunday night, you can't argue with the result. It just is what it is. You hope for a better one next week. You work harder for a better one next week. But it is what it is. Now, last week we spent some time talking about the redacted climate documents that came out. These were, of course, Chris Bowen hiding behind the Sharpie, like I've got in my hand, line after line after line after line after line. And you know the detail. This was all about a report which government had, which wasn't about the location of Harold Holt. It was not the location of a secret gold that is yet to be dug up at Sovereign Hill. No national security. Just the reality of what is coming our way when it comes to higher power prices because this government believes we need to completely change the energy system. Last week, the Senate had a very strong debate where, in fact, everyone but the Labor Party voted for the Labor Party to release the damn documents, to release the documents unredacted and to do so by Friday. Well, Chris Bowen responded to the Senate and, surprise, surprise, it was a giant middle finger. And his view was that there is no need to release any more of the documents. Put simply, Mr Bowen chose the latter, telling the Senate in a letter that releasing the unredacted advice would reveal details about cabinet deliberations. This is, of course, the justification for tightening the freedom of information laws, making it even harder to get even the pages they didn't put the black line through. Direct quote, "Unless ministers can be assured of the confidentiality of cabinet meetings, they may not speak freely or honestly between themselves and may be more likely to suppress their views on present policies that may be unpopular or politically embarrassing." So is that him admitting that the actual contents of that document is unpopular or politically embarrassing? Any of these outcomes would ultimately impact negatively on Australia's national interest. We must keep the document it will explain why everything costs more secret, but it's in the national interest to keep it secret. Compromising that confidentiality, he said, could cause ministers and the officials who brief them to temper what they write or say, undermining decision-making and policy deployment. No, we just want to know what facts are you operating with so we know what discussion we're actually having. Releasing the unredacted copy could also harm the government's relationships with the states. The Commonwealth must work to maintain a delicate balance between delivering the best outcomes at a national level and recognising the unique circumstances, policies and needs in each jurisdiction. Blah, blah, BS, BS. Every person bar the government in the Senate, from Lydia to Pauline Hanson, believed that these documents should be released. The government turns around with the big middle finger. Well, at some point, when will the Senate turn around and say, well, you know what, until you release these documents, until you actually start opening up and being less secretive, maybe we're going to start slow play the ball. Maybe you're not going to get everything you want when it comes to what you put before the Parliament. Let's wait, let's watch, let's see. Remember, the excuse that he is using for not releasing the document and keeping all of those little black lines is because he's a cabinet minister and there's special super secret advice that only a cabinet minister should see. Again, it's not about national secrets, it's about what he openly describes as being potentially politically unpopular. And they want to make that system even harder. They basically don't want you to see any of the documents, let alone the ones hardly held together. The Attorney-General and the Prime Minister have already introduced a plan. The plan is to make it even harder to get access to government documents, to sweep more of it under the rug. Even the ABC knows this to be rubbish. Labor's plans for freedom of information changes make it even harder to access government data. We will keep talking about it because I think it's central to the democracy. It ain't about Team Red, it ain't about Team Blue, Team Green, Team Yellow. It's about a system that works or works for them. And we already have to work too hard so they can spend the tax money by piddling it up against the wall on whatever they consider to be the priorities. A couple of other quick ones we're talking about. Prince Andrew will very soon no longer be a prince. In fact, he will have no connection to the royal family other than blood. He won't be at any functions. He won't be at any family bashes. Why? Well, you all know why. He will only be known by a birth name, no titles, no data, and what a thing to wake up to on Saturday morning.
Extraordinary announcement from Buckingham Palace late today. Prince Andrew soon no longer a prince.
King Charles caving to pressure, stripping him of his royal titles and evicting him from Royal Lodge.
Prince Andrew is set to be stripped of his royal titles and surrender the lease on his official residence.
King Charles has now begun the formal process to remove the titles and honours of his brother Andrew.
Yes, big news, global news. Now, one of the reasons why this has happened now, apart from everything that we know, apart from the Giuffre book, is that apparently there are more emails that Andrew hoped to meet Jeffrey Epstein after his prison release. Fair dinkum. And you know the house that he's lived in for ages? Well, he's going to get the arse from that too, and rightly so. No one has sympathy for this bloke at all. And can I tell you somebody they have even less sympathy for? The woman he divorced 30 years ago. Fergie apparently has lived in the house for much of that time, to the bloke that she could not stay married to, that was not married to for 30 years. Who cares where she lives? Stop writing about it. I don't care. He's hardly going to be homeless. Apparently, according to the Daily Mail, they think there's a chance he's going to end up in a £10 million villa in Abu Dhabi. Unsurprisingly, this has sent the world of royal correspondence aghast. Or gasper, there we go. Here is our mate Russell Myers. I'm with Danica and James before.
The royal family and the king taking this decision to strip away his titles, all his honours, and that, of course, for Andrew certainly was the biggest fall from grace that he could have suffered. But I think if the pressure is happening from both sides of the Atlantic now for him to talk to the authorities, then perhaps he might find himself in a position where he has no choice but to speak to FBI investigators, because certainly that this case is not going away anytime soon.